So before we start learning today, I want to ask all of you, everybody listening to this year, we should bear in mind that the title we are learning in this year is dedicated L'Refuah Shlema for Imi Meirosi. My mother had a stroke. She's 92 years old. And Ishut Tzedekis, one of the greatest people in my life, I could say Shali v'Shalochem Shala. And the impact she had on my chinuch as my other 6 brothers is unbelievable, is huge. And at her age, being a Holocaust survivor, she's not in a very good condition. So the title we learn should be L'Refuah Shlema. She's presently in the hospital, and right after the Shiur, I will be going over to the hospital to see her and talk to the doctors. Fradel Bas Leah. So I really ask all of you to daven for her, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send her L'Refuah Shlema. And I so much hope I will be able to be mevasa b'seres tovos. The sugya we're discussing today is once again associated with the coronavirus, and it is the level of liability, or at least responsibility, of a person that causes others to fall ill. Of a person that out of lack of taking responsible measures infected other people. To what degree does he bear responsibility? And the reason I'm talking about the sugya is because a person turned to me with a very tragic shaila. He works in an old age home or a nursing home. One of his children was diagnosed with COVID-19. He was supposed to be in isolation. But he was a chacham, like many others amongst us. And he decided his job is so important and they need him. He's wearing a mask. He's going to use alcohol gel to disinfect his hands. And he went to work. After a few days, he fell ill. But what is far worse, several of the elderly people in the nursing home fell ill, and some of them died. In all probability, out of his recklessness. And he came to me crying. What is he supposed to do? Are there any tikkunei tshuva that he could take on himself? So the sugya of tikkunei tshuva is a fascinating sugya, and maybe we will dedicate a shiur to that sugya in itself. I will not discuss that today. So 3 times we find in the Ramon, Shulchan Aruch, Shin Lamed Daled, Hilchos Shabbos, Kuf Pei Hey, and Hilchos Nida Yoredeya, once again in Hilchos Yayin Nesach, person that was nichshal b'shoigeg in an avera, how many fast days he must take upon himself? Hilchos Nida, Hilchos Shabbos, 40 days he needs to fast. And that is a minhag Ashkenaz, so maybe at another opportunity we will discuss the entire realm and concept of tikkunei tshuva. That's not the focus of today's shiur. What I want to talk about is the level, the degree of responsibility that a person bears if out of negligence he caused others to be infected, and especially if chas v'sholem he caused others to perish. So probably the earliest source dealing with the responsibility of a person that is ill, and he is ill with a contagious disease, not to infect others and to take every measure to be sure that he isn't causing others to fall ill. Sefer Hasidim, going back 1,000 years, Rabbi Yehuda Chosid, Sefer Hasidim, Seif Tov Reish Ayin Gimel, says that a person that has a contagious disease cannot go to a public bathhouse or a swimming pool unless he lets people know that I'm sick and you might become sick if you come. And he bases this ruling on 3 mitzvahs. 1 mitzvah saseh and 2 lavim. Lo yisamoid al dam reacho. So in Sanhedrin 9 Gimel Amud, the Gemara says that this posuk is the source that a person needs to go out of his way to try to save people whose lives are in jeopardy. Menayin sheroya odam toivea benor chayes v'listaboim olav shu chayev la'atzil sheneim lo yisamed al dam reyecho. So if you need to initiate bekum v'aseh to save another person, it's a kal v'chomer that you're not allowed to put another person in danger with your reckless conduct. So that's the first source. Lo yisamed al dam reyecho. Number 2, lifnei yever lo yisitin mechshol. If people aren't aware and you're putting them in danger, that's lifnei yever. So when we spoke about lifnei yever, bal peh u'bechsav, I brought the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch says, "Hamikro hazeh yoytze medei pshutoi." Literally translated, you're not allowed to put an obstacle in the way of a blind man, lest he fall and hurt himself. But the Minchas Chinuch says, obviously, Chazal were moitzias aposik medei pshutoi, and in Avodah Zorah Davav we find menayin shelo yoshet odom kois yain lenoza ve'eve menachai leben noach. So according to Chazal's interpretation, it is only about this Aveter, because that Rambam doesn't bring any other pshat. I argued that the Rambam brings Divrei Chazal. He doesn't bring psukim. Milze de pshita lifnei iver lo yisit mechshel eino yoytze midei pshutoi. And if you put an obstacle in the way of a blind man and he fell and he hurt himself, of course you're over and lifnei iver lo yisit mechshel. And I think the Sefer Chesudim proves my point, because we're not dealing with this Aveter. So if you cause damage or harm or pain or suffering or death to another person with your reckless negligence, yes, you're over on Isam del Damriacho, Lifnei Evalis Mechshal, and you have to Lereachu Kamoicho. So recently we discussed the mitzvah, we have to Lereachu Kamoicho, and I made it clear from the Rambam. It's not only a mitzvah regarding your feelings and emotions, it's about your actions and your deeds, the way you interact with people. So you're not allowed to put other people in danger, and therefore he cannot go to a swimming pool or a mikveh if he might infect others. So I was the first of an Etzisol to call upon the authorities to lock down the men's mikvahs and to recommend standing 5 minutes under the shower, that is tishu kabin. We need to prevent other people from being infected in our mikvahs. So the first source is Sefer Chasidim. Does a person bear responsibility? And does it have any relevance to monetary issues? So recently we have been discussing the monetary aspect of the coronavirus, but what I'm mentioning now is different. Fascinating tshuva of the Ramah, tshuva Ramah Semachov, quoted in the Shach, Choshe Mishpat Shin Yud Beis Yiv Kotten Beis, and the Shach clearly agrees with the Ramah. Reuven rented a room to Shimon, and Shimon was supposed to move in with his wife. And as the story goes in Tshuvas Ramah, it's not that he rented him a vacant, an empty apartment, but rather a room in his own home. And according to the original agreement, Reuven was supposed to live in that house with his family, and Shimon moves in with his family, and he has his private quarters, but they're living together, basically. Before Shimon moves in with his wife fell ill with a contagious disease. Reuven says, no, I want to back out of this agreement. I'm not going to put my family in danger. So you can't move in. Shimon says, we have an agreement, and the agreement is valid, and I do plan to move in. The Ramah says, Shimon is right. And Reuben does not have the privilege of backing out of the agreement. He's afraid to be infected. Well, take care of yourself. That is not a reason to invalidate a valid agreement. And the Ramah says everybody that wants to back out of an agreement will come up with all kinds of tirutzim. And the Ramah proves from two sources that you do not have to be so concerned about a contagious disease. In Hilchos Bikur Cholim, we do not find that you shouldn't go for Bikur Cholim if a person has a disease and you might be infected. Proof number two, or source number two, Perek HaMadir in Masechet Ksubis. The Gemara discusses at length when a person was Makadosh as Wishuv Motza Bo Mumin, and he finds different blemishes, different mumim in the woman that he was Makadosh. Could he back out of this agreement? It's an agreement like any other agreement, Kiddushin, and we do find a concept of Kiddushay Tos. So Chazal detail many different blemishes that are very, very troubling to a husband. Ask the Ramah, so why don't Chazal say if she has a contagious disease, you could back out of the Kiddushin? No, it's not reason enough to back out of an agreement. Tshuvas Ramah, quoted in Shach. Does that mean that according to the Ramah, there's no such a thing as a contagious disease? You don't have to be concerned. That the Ramah himself in Yoredei Akuf Tezayin Sifei Paskins, that when a pandemic breaks out, you are supposed to leave the city and go elsewhere, to another city, to another town, to another country in which the Megefa did not spread. So obviously the Ramah was very well aware of contagious disease. And that Ramon Yoredei Kuf Tezayin is based on Tshuvas Maharil. And that was the custom in days of yore. People used to flee areas that were hit by epidemics. HaMarshal Yam Shel Shloime Bava Kama Perek Vav Simacha Vav. The Marshal says the same. You need to flee, you need to run away. But how does that fit in with the Gemara I quoted 1,000 times recently in Bava Kama Samach Amid Beis, Dever Be'ir Kaneis Raglecho? So on one hand, Chazal say, if there's an epidemic, get into your private room and lock the door. The Marshal explains. Before disease becomes widespread, leave, go elsewhere. But if many people are already ill, too late. You miss the boat, you miss the train. Because to pack up your family and wait at the bus stop and get on a bus, get on a train, you're putting yourself in danger. So if disease is rampant, lock yourself into the house. But we do see that in days of yore, they were very much aware of contagious disease, and they took extreme measures. The Mogan Avraham Tav Kuf Ayin Vav quotes the Shlo. Kasher Ababuot Porchot probably means the Black Plague or other epidemics. One must save the children and take them away elsewhere. And if he doesn't do so, Domoy Beroisha, and he bears responsibility if Chas v'Sholem, children will die. So how does this Ramah fit in with Tshuvas HaRamah? One must say, but breaching an agreement is not justified. You need to let me in. We have a signed agreement. If you're scared, if you're afraid, you leave. Why do I need to leave? We have an agreement. You might be concerned, but it's your problem and not my problem. The Nesivis on the spot, Sifkot Nalef, Shinud Bezach Shemishpet says that the ruling of the Ramah is only valid if Shimon's wife became ill after they signed the agreement. But if we become aware that Shimon's wife was ill when the agreement was signed, she still was not symptomatic, but it is clear she was ill, then it's a mekach toas, even according to the Ramah. So this proves what I'm trying to explain and argue. One should be concerned about contagious disease, but it is not enough to breach an agreement. So if Shimon's wife was ill when the agreement was signed, that's a mekach toas. And Reuben says, no, you're not coming in. But if it happened later, then it's not a mekach toas. So Reuben doesn't have the right to break this agreement, and Shimon could say to Reuben, well, I have a monetary right. We signed an agreement. If you're concerned, you could move elsewhere. Why do I have to leave the house? But that's an interesting psak, and many disagree with that psak. I want to briefly relate to the two sources that Amos brings to prove his argument. One is Bikar Cholim. Why don't we find that if a person is ill with a contagious disease, there's no mitzvah Bikar Cholim? L'choyre, it's not much of a proof, it's not much of an argument. Well, if you come to visit the Choyle, you could sit 5 meters away, you could wear a mask, bring alcohol gel to disinfect your hands. If people take proper precautions, we could assume that they will not be infected. There's a difference living together in the same quarters. It's impossible to keep apart and going to visit the Choyle for 5 minutes. Chuvas Divrei Yatzev, Moiri Varabi, the great Kloisenberger Rebbe. So the Kloisenberger Rebbe was the 4th generation from the Divrei Chaim, and like his great Seder, the Divrei Chaim was not only known as a Godel B'Torah and a tremendous Lamdan, he was the Poisek Hador, together with Reb Shlomo Kruger and Reb Yosef Shor Natan Zan. All the real toughest shilas of his time came to his table. And so his great-grandson, the Kloisenberger Rebbe Moiri Verabi, besides being an unbelievable tzaddik yesod olam, he was one of the gedolim of our time, as we see in Shalosh Tshuvas Divrei Yatzev. Chosh Mishpat Siman Ayin Tet Ot Yud Aleph. There's a very lengthy tshuva of the Divrei Yatzev, and he relates to this question of contagious disease. So the Ramo says, why don't we find in Hilchas Bikar Cholim that you don't need to come and be Mevaka Choyle because you might get infected? So the Divrei Yatzev brings the Gemara in Adora Mem Aleph Omid Beis that if a person is ill with boredom, then you shouldn't come visit him. The Ran says that this is an illness that affects your digestive system and it causes diarrhea. So the Ran says you might be putting the choyle in a very unpleasant situation if he needs to go to the bathroom and you're sitting there, and therefore better don't come. But Rashi, it's not really Rashi, but rather one of the Rishonim says that the boredom is an illness shekoifetz ma'odam la'odam. It jumps from one person to the other. So according to one of the Rishonim at least, that is exactly the issue. You shouldn't come visit him because you might being your health in danger, in jeopardy. So we do find a source regarding Bikar Cholim that one should not come to visit a person if he might be infected and he might fall ill. Yes, it's only one of the Rishonim. It's not in Rambam, not in Tur, not in Shulchan Aruch, but I argue it's not really proof because you could come to visit for a very short visit and take all the precautions, and you don't need to be overly worried, overly concerned. But still, you need to take precautions not to be infected and not to infect others. So source number 2 that the Ramah brings, Lagabe Mum Be'isha. So once again, the Divrei Yatzev quotes the Aruch HaShulchan, Even Ezer, Lamed Tes, Sif Yud Ches. The Aruch HaShulchan says, even though Chazal did not specify, but it goes without saying that there are other illnesses or problems or blemishes which would maybe invalidate Kedushin. For instance, contagious disease. So the Aruch HaShulchan does say contagious disease would be a reason to get out of Kedushin. Well, it's only the Aruch HaShulchan. I think in this issue that Ramo is right, but I have a totally different approach. Contagious diseases are not chronic. The vast majority of people, overcome the disease, like the flu, like the coronavirus. Vast majority of people, especially young people, healthy people, might be ill for a while. Some have tougher symptoms. Some don't have any symptoms at all. But it's not a mum to invalidate condition. We'll get over it. So the Beis Yosef does bring that if a person was Makadosh a woman, and then she gets leprosy, she's a leper, tsaras, then that is a reason to get out of this agreement. The only contagious disease I'm aware of that really had no cure is tsaras. And therefore, the Beis Yosef, quoting the Rashbash, says that is a mum that will affect Kedushin. Other contagious diseases, some of them have cures. If it's bacteria, then we use antibiotics. If it's a virus, we don't really cure, but usually the body overcomes and people get well. And therefore, that is the reason it wouldn't impact Kiddushin, not because we don't have to be concerned about being infected. Reb Chaim Palagi, Shalas Teshuvas Nishmas Kol Chai Chelik Beis Choshe Mishpot Simemem Tes, has a fascinating tshuva. The question is a fascinating question and so relevant. So at the beginning of this outbreak, one of the first things I did, I closed the shul in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. Why did I close the shul? Even before I closed my shul. Because I became aware that doctors are falling ill. Medical staff. We can't afford doctors falling ill. Some patients that came to daven in shul were falling ill. Patients whose immune system is extremely compromised. And therefore, even before I closed my shul, one of the first things I did, I closed the shul in Shaarei Tzedek. So the story of Reb Chaim Palagi going back hundreds of years, there was a doctor in town, and the doctor treated patients. Some of them obviously had contagious disease. So other congregants said the doctor shouldn't come to shul. We don't want, he's putting our life in danger. Let him stay home. And if he wants to come to shul, he needs to build around his seat a protective shield. Glass, transparent, plastic, I don't know. I don't know whether they had plastics going back hundreds of years, more than 200 years. The doctor said, I have a right to come to shul. I'm a member of the congregation just like you. And if you're afraid that I might infect you, then you should build a protective shield around my place. It's your expense, not mine. Reb Chaim Palagi brings the Tshuvas Harama that Reuven rented out space to Shimon. Reuven can't get out of the agreement, and Reb Chaim Palagi wonders. And he argues that the Rambam contradicts his own opinion in Yoredei Kuf Tezai when he says, if there's an epidemic, you need to run away, you need to leave town. Anyway, the maskona for Reb Chaim Palagi is, the doctor can come to shul, but he is the one that needs to bear the expense of building a shield around his space. And he is the one that needs to take the precaution not to infect others. In other words, he is the mazik, and therefore it is his responsibility. Just an interesting comment. Yoredei Kuf Tezayin, when the Ramo brings, if there's an epidemic, you need to leave town. Rabbi Akiva Eiger quotes Rabbeinu Bachye, Parshas Koirach. When Anshe Koirach put up this terrible machloikas against Moshe Rabbeinu. Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, "Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe v'lahara neimor, He bodlo metochu eidu hazois va'achala oisem karoga." And then a plague strikes Adas Koirach. Rabbeinu Bachya asks, why do they need to separate themselves from the others? He bodlo metoch eidu hara hazois. So Rabbeinu Bachya says, interesting, it was a plague. And when a plague strikes, people get infected. It's contagious. And that is why Kodesh Baruch Hu tells them, He bodlunu mea eido haro azois. And Rabbi Kiva quotes them in Yoredei on the spot in Siman Kuf Tezayin. Anyway, Reb Chaim Palaji says, yes, other members of the shul have a right to say, we are afraid. And he cannot come to shul. He must come first, he must leave last, and he must build a protective shield around his space. That is the psak of Reb Chaim Palaji. Fascinating machloikis, tshuvis, going back almost 200 years between two of the greatest gedolim in Galicia. Reb Shloime Kluger and Reb Shloime Dremer. Reb Shloime Kluger was the Maggid in Brod, very famous. Reb Shloime Dremer wrote the Sefer Shalas HaTshuvas Beis Shloime, one of the most powerful tshuvas for him. The Chazon Ish was a big chassid of the Beis Shloime. So the question they're dealing with, Reuven rented huge fields for pasture. He had his herds of animals, and other owners used to send their animals to pasture in the fields of Reuven. He signed an agreement with Shimon that Shimon is going to have his herd come over to those same fields to graze. After a short while, Reuven's behemoths started dropping dead, and it became obvious to him that Shimon's herd was infected, and became known to him that some of Shimon's animals died before he signed an agreement to have them graze together with Reuven's animals. Reuven has a twofold, threefold, fivefold claim against Shimon. First of all, I want your animals out immediately. They're causing the demise of my animals. Number two, you are severely damaging my business, because as it becomes known that there is a plague, a dever, in my herds, I will lose all my clients and they'll take their animals away. Number three, some of the animals that died were mine and I want compensation. Some of the animals belong to other owners and they will call me and ask me to pay them compensation. Reb Shloime Dremer, Tshuvas Beis Shloime Choshe Mishpat Kuf Chavav, deals with this question. And he analyzed this question beautifully. Number one, Nechnaz Bereshus. You gave me permission to bring my animals in. And if a Reuven gives permission to Shimon to bring his oxen into his field, and what if Shimon's oxen killed one of Reuven's behemoths, then he bears no responsibility. My animals came in Bereshus. So the Beis Shloime says, but this is not the Shus. If you fooled me and you weren't honest and you were aware that your animals are ill, then this is a Mekech Tos. I want them out. But then the Beis Shloime says, how do we know in total confidence that it is really Shimon's animals that infected Reuven's? If there's an epidemic, if there's a deva, maybe Reuven's animals infect Shimon's. And maybe some of the other animals from other owners infected Reuven's animals and not necessarily Shimon. It's an umdana. But the most basic rule in Dina Moment says, and as long as we don't have definitive proof that Shimon is to blame, then And then the Bishleimer brings argument number 3 based on Bova Kama Mem Zayin Omid Beis. Hanoisen Sama Movis B'fnei Behemis Chaveroi Potter. Hava Loi Sheloi Lechol. Your animal shouldn't have eaten what I put forth. Yes, I gave Sama Movis, but it's not my responsibility if the animal decided to be crazy and to eat Sama Movis. And the Gemara says, same applies if it's just fruit or vegetables. Lav dafka Sama Movis. Havale Sheloi Lechol. Reb Shlomo Kluger is mefalpel. He disagrees with some of the arguments, but he reaches the same conclusion, that we cannot be Machayev Shimon to compensate Reuven. I think Reuven would have the right to tell Shimon, get your animals out. But I don't think he has enough of an argument to demand monetary compensation. The argument of Havalei Shaloi Toichal, I think, is a total mistake. When Shimon puts his fruit into Reuven's domain, the situation the Gemara deals with, one of Reuven's animals overate, and she fell ill, or he fell ill and died. So the other party could say, your animal overate, that is not my responsibility. But how could Shimon tell Reuven, your animals shouldn't graze? What are they supposed to do? Why are they in the fields if not to graze? So it's just interesting to realize that one of the points of argument between Reb Shlomo Kluger and Reb Shlomo Drimmer is the Beis Shlomo assumes that the way disease goes from one animal to the other is by grazing, by the digestive system. And Reb Shlomo Kluger asks, how do you know? Maybe it's the pulmonary system. Maybe it's just being together in the air they breathe. And if it's by breathing that they become infected, you can't say Havale Shelo Linshon, because breathing is not voluntary. Breathing is just natural. It's just a impulse. So it's interesting. One of our previous Shiur, I brought the Gemara in Ksubas Defiant Zayin Amid Beis, in which is obvious that Chazal, going back 2,000 years, were aware that the way disease is transmitted from one person to the other might be by breath, by the pulmonary system, and might be by the digestive system. So here we have an argument between Reb Shlomo Kluger and Reb Shlomo Drimmer, two of the Gedolim of Glitzi 200 years ago. How did Shimon's animals infect Reuven's animals? Was it by transmission through the digestive system or through the pulmonary system? To make a long discussion short, in my opinion, yes, Reuven doesn't have enough argument to demand compensation. But it is clear that if Shimon was aware that his animals are ill and his herd is infected, definitely had no right to conceal that information from Reuven and cause Reuven's herd to be infected. If we would know with certainty that that is the situation, I would paskin he needs to compensate Reuven. Obviously, it's not more than a grama, but I made my opinion clear. Shanas Chuvas Minchas Chelak Aleph, defining the concept of Dina de Garmi. Whenever a person causes damage or loss to another, directly or indirectly, b'maisa o b'grama, if it's out of negligence, that is garmi, and he needs to compensate the person to whom he caused loss or damage. Coming back to the tragic question I mentioned, Tikkun Tshuva is a discussion. We will maybe deal with that another opportunity. But yes, this is gross negligence. In Lashon Kodesh, Rashlanut Pushat. And this person did an awful thing, knowing that one of his family members has COVID-19, has corona, and he was totally and recklessly negligent. And in all probability, he is the one that caused the demise of some of the elderly people in this facility. Yes, he bears tragic responsibility. So we shouldn't be having questions like this. And as I said 1,000 times, it is our chayva, obligation, al pi Torah, to take every precaution and prevent the spread of this disease.